Hello, welcome to this week's video. This week I found a Photinia. It was a base of a Photinia bush. I'm not sure where I got it from, but I had Photinia written on it, so obviously someone had given it to me and told me what it was. And it's been sitting outside for quite some time. So I used a chainsaw just to get it into shape, cut off a few of the lumps out of it, and then put it onto the lathe and turned it down using a roughing gouge, and it's quite a light coloured wood. There wasn't much of a feature to it, but it was a very hard wood. I suppose it's similar to a lot of the woods that you get in the garden. They seem to take a long time to grow, and of course they're fine grained and extremely hard to turn, and this was no different. As I turned it down, I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. I tried to make it like a barrel shape. I thought a barrel shape would be something different, and make it into a vase or a vase, depending on which hemisphere you're from. And because it was a lighter colour and there wasn't much character to it, there's a little bit of character but not much, I thought I'd use the beading tool and put a couple of beads in the middle just to break it up a little bit. And I put one bead in, and on the second bead, I'm not sure if I was pushing too hard or it caught onto something, but it made a mess of the bead, so I ended up cutting that out. And then a thought came into my head, which doesn't happen all that often, and I remember getting some copper strips. We were taking a roof off a gas pumping plant down near the city, and they used these copper strips for their lightning arrestor. Do you call it lightning arrestor? So it just diverted the lightning away from the building and into the ground. And of course, when we replaced the roof, they also replaced the type of lightning diverters they had, and these copper bands were not required. And so I've had them sitting there thinking that I'd do something with them. Yeah. And of course they've been sitting at the back of the shed for probably 4 or 5 years now. And so I decided to use part of the copper and put a band around the middle of the piece of wood. I used super glue or CA glue, and I tried it first just to see if it would actually hold, and it has held quite well. And so I continued around and then cut it and joined it, and the join come up quite well. It was you can't really see the join. I did such a good job. So the copper band certainly changed the look of the vase. I think it improved it, otherwise it would have been a fairly bland type of an object. So I finished sanding it, and I gave it some sanding finish. No, and I gave it some sanding, I forget what that is now. What is that? Sanding, what do you call that? I gave it some, not sanding oil, and I gave it some sanding oil, not sanding oil, what is it? Some sanding sealer. So I ended up put some sanding sealer on it, and then some restoring wax and polish, and then turned it around and started to hollow out the middle. So I hollowed that out quite well. I used a carbine tool to hollow it out. I started out with a straight tool and then ended up with a curvy carbine tool just to get around the sides, get around the corners, and it came up quite well in the end. So with the fine grain, it threw out a lot of dust, and I have got a dust mask that I use. It's an enclosed mask that stops all the dust from getting into the crevices. But as soon as you take the mask off, I've noticed in the light you can see the fine dust is just sitting there, and it takes a long time to get rid of. And I've got a dust extraction unit that I have in the part of the shed, so I've moved it closer to the lathe. And I've been using that lately when I've been turning on the lathe, and it certainly dissipates the dust particles. So once I take the dust mask off, there's not much of the fine dust floating around. Probably defeats the purpose using a dust mask, and then you take it off and you're still sucking in the fine particles of dust. So I think I've fixed that little problem. I've also got the lathe to a height that is making it a lot easier to turn. I haven't got sore shoulders and a sore back. It seems to be working quite well, so I think I've got it pretty right in the safety aspect of the turning. So the Photinia come up quite well as a vase. I left it fairly bulky, so it's fairly heavy at the bottom, and it looks quite nice with the copper inlay, and hopefully it'll be a nice Christmas present for somebody. Anyway, hope you enjoy this video. I'll see you next time. Cheerio. Back again. I did upload the video and then noticed that I had spelt the credit wrong. I'd spelt Photinia wrong. I forgot to put an extra I in there, and of course once you see it you can't unsee it. It's been playing on my mind as to whether I'd fix it up or just leave it, and of course there's two voices in my head, one saying change it and the other one saying leave it, it'll be fine. Anyway, the voice that said change it actually won, so I got back in here, changed the spelling so it's spelt right. And then the other thing was, I was up around 2 o'clock in the morning, couldn't get to sleep, and I was wondering who had actually given me this piece of wood. It had been playing on my mind for quite some time, and it finally come to me. I had played it back over the time, and I realised that I got it from a John over at Lancefield, the next town over. And John had cleaned up his garden, and he's going to put a shed in the back of his house block. He took this Photinia out and had it sitting there, and I asked if I could bring it home and try it. So it's been sitting in the shed for 2 or 3 years now. I finally solved that mystery as to where I got the piece of wood from, even if it was 2 o'clock in the morning. But I remembered when I got up, wrote it down, and I thought I'd better change the video, change the spelling of the title, and also let you know where I got the wood from. Anyway, that's about it.